better and more articulate than me have explained the ins and outs of why it fails. So I'm not going to go into that too much in terms of detail, but essentially the Armada sets sail. Now in 1587, as a bit of context, the famous case of Cadiz, where Drake leads fire ships. So Elizabeth's move to go and send Drake off to cause mischief, we can say, was a good one. It effectively puts the Armada back a year. Now, the Armada, the simple idea from the Spanish, the basic idea is that there are many Spanish troops, obviously, in the Netherlands. The idea is that once the English Channel has been cleared of English naval opposition, then those troops can be collected to add to the 6,000 Spanish troops who are on the Armada, bringing roughly 23,000 troops, they're saying, to invade England. And this obviously would have been a significant invasion. This would have been something that England would have found extremely challenging to deal with. There are conflicting descriptions of how ready England was to fight on the soil, but let's stick with what did happen rather than what didn't. Now, in terms of the Armada, they were never always likely to succeed. In effect, the advantages that Spain had were quite neatly balanced by the niche areas where England had some success, like the large guns, meaning that the tactic of boarding your opponents at sea was something that Spain were pretty much unable to do. Another aspect of this was when the famous issue of the weather, which does cause a problem, blows the Armada off up towards Ireland, and ultimately, the whole idea of the weather defeating the Spanish that we like to crow about. That's made much worse by the fact that many ships, many of the vessels of Spain did cut their anchors thanks to the fire ships and launched early because of what Drake had already done. And that has the added effect that when we get the bad weather, they are very much susceptible to that. The Spanish themselves don't operate very well. There's not very good communication, and it fails. And once they fail to get that supremacy of the waters around England, it means that there isn't going to be a chance of landing those troops at all. Now, ultimately, I think, much as we might like to romanticize and think about Elizabeth's speech at Tilbury Docks, I may have the body of a woman but the heart of a lion, man, etc. In reality, England did get quite lucky, a combination of Spain's errors, the weather, and them just not really being the Spanish, not making the right choices and right decisions certainly helps England. It's also worth pointing out that it's not the only Armada. Two more Armadas are sent in the 1590s and 1597. It's actually arguably a more serious threat. They have a clear run, really, going the Irish way, but that is, again, weather intervenes, which helps. Now, in 1598, Philip II dies, and ultimately Spain has struggled in the Netherlands conflict. 1596, remember, we get the Triple Alliance between the provinces of the Netherlands, England and France. By 1598, we've got France and Spain at peace, but they hate each other, and ultimately that's where Elizabeth wants them to be, where they are not fighting one another, but they're also not likely to work together against her. Now, again, the partisan interpretation of this, but I feel that Elizabeth's policy is disjointed throughout. I don't really feel that that her actions or the actions of those around her are massively responsible for England surviving in this period. Yes, they achieved their objectives, which is to prevent the Netherlands being subjugated by the Spanish and, have that economic outlet there and prevent a launch pad for an invasion. However, there is economic knock-on by the fact that obviously England and Spain aren't trading because of the war between them, and this does cause problems to an already challenged economy. There is the opportunity for some men to make their name and maybe lays the foundations for some of the more exploration that you see towards the end of Elizabeth's reign and beyond. the early stages of the British Empire. But, Elizabeth makes mistakes. The appointment of Leicester is terrible. And how she deals with Leicester is poor as well. So ultimately, the fact that the Dutch are never convinced that England are really in it to support them and willing to stick by them. The relationship with France, as I've already said, is, again, inconsistent. I think generally there isn't going to be trust for Elizabeth from foreign powers. And definitely one thing that she doesn't do, much to the chagrin of some on her council, is she does not stand up as this kind of defence of international Protestantism. Now, to be fair, that was not her aim anyway. She didn't ever want England to be in the position of being the sort of the champion of Protestantism. But it does mean, and this fits with a lot, really, in my view of Elizabeth's reign, in that it's almost like a reign of non-committal. It's a reign of not really being willing to chain herself to any great principles, and the knock-on effect of that is that we have quite a insipid foreign policy and a sense that England is reactionary rather than having any great overall aims itself. And that really rounds up the situation in England, France and Spain. When Elizabeth dies, England is at war with Spain still. That's dealt with by James, her successor, reasonably effectively. England is saved. It doesn't get invaded during the time of Elizabeth. It comes close to it. But, this idea of Elizabeth bravely standing against and her stewardship of England, meaning that she defied the threat of the Spanish, I'm not sure. I think that is an exaggeration. And I think it's maybe more... One thing that I would say about the period, and certainly the Armada, is that in a way it's quite beneficial to England, because definitely from Philip's point of view, he's distracted by the idea of invading England, meaning that an unsuccessful invasion of England is what is launched, rather than what would have ultimately been more damaging to England in the long term, which would be a greater effort to take control of Spain and take control of the Netherlands and make them a fully fledged colony of the Spanish. So, Elizabeth gets lucky, but ultimately we could argue that her policy is successful. And to give Elizabeth her dues, which maybe I haven't there, because I'm slightly harsh on Elizabeth generally, is that she does, in taking a more moderate approach and in taking a more conservative approach, she does resist the more radical and more the enthusiasm, the war lust, whatever you want to put it, that some of her councillors have towards the idea of being more dominant. In not being particularly decisive, she at least stays away from the kind of mistakes that possibly I suspect her father would have made, Henry VIII, in terms of going all in with something only to then realise that it doesn't work. She doesn't bankrupt England by sending England off on ill thought out foreign policy approaches. And ultimately, as it comes towards the end, England is no worse off than they were before, which, if we're talking about comparing the situation that England could have faced with the most powerful state on the continent launching an attempted invasion of England and failing, then I think maybe we should give, or I should give, Elizabeth more credit than I have done.